Hello, true duelists. It's YGO Strat's Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History. We're going to be talking about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that didn't. Today's card, a card that's been on the Forbidden and Limited lists since the list's inception. It's Monster Reborn. Reborn the Monster, or Monster Reborn, is an old-ass card, to the point that it has 28 printings to date, or I guess 32, depending on how you count it being printed in all three of the decks and Yugi's Legendary decks and the Legendary Hero decks products, but I don't really give a shit. So, if you feel like being pedantic in the comments, this is your opportunity to do so, but I'm calling it 28. As of now. Its first print in the game was in the Legend of Blue Eyes set in 2002 as an ultra rare, the first ever set in the game for the TCG. Notable reprints include the starter decks Yugi and Kaiba, also in 2002 in the coveted Peasant Rare rarity. It got a super rare print in 2009's Dark Legends, a secret rare printing in 2018 from Battles of Legend Relentless Revenge, and a Lost Art promo in 2018 as well, giving us the original OCG art and a very lovely ultra rare. And lastly, it got a premium gold rare and maximum gold in 2020, as well as 22 other reprints I don't care to list. For time on the ban list, as mentioned earlier, this card is actually one that's been on the list the longest, being put to 1 on the May 2002 ban list, quote unquote, the first ever list to restrict how many copies of certain cards could be played, although it's worth noting none were banned, everything was just limited or semied. For reference, Blue Eyes of Legend dropped in March of 2002 in North America, the earliest of the TCG regions to get it, and this list dropped a mere 2 months after its release, if I'm reading these dates right, so it was allowed in multiples for about 2 months ever, and then that's it, even now 21 years later. From here, it stayed limited until the August 2004 ban list, the first ever list to ban cards, where it was one of the 13 cards to be removed from the game. It would stay banned for 4 years before being limited on the March 2008 ban list, going back to 1 for 4 formats before they banned it again in 2009 in September, for 2 formats, because September 2010 they bring it back again to 1 for 3 years until the infamous September 2013 ban list, where they would again give it the ban. This time round it would stay banned for just over 4 years, before coming back to limited on the February 2018 ban list, where as I make this video, it has been ever since. A normal spell card, or magic card depending on how old your copy is, its effect reads: target one monster in either graveyard, special summon it. Plain and simple effect there, not even 10 words with modern PSCT. This card is similar to a number of other cards in the game that exist above the rest of the card pool, in the staple zone, as I will say. It's one of the cards printed incredibly early in the game, with a generic and strong effect, and one that would see quote-unquote weaker versions of itself printed on later down the line, not unlike Regeki or Harpy's Feather Duster. Due to how generic it is, I won't spend too much time on the decks that played it specifically, but more so why they played it and why the card fell off a bit after its return in 2018. In the early game, its effect was incredibly strong. From good stuff piles of early sets playing the most copies of the best generic cards, being able to summon a strong monster of your own that the opponent had managed to out, or even revive an opponent's monster from their grave that you had managed to out, was nothing short of great. It doesn't matter whose copy of Summoned Skull fell to a trap hole and ended up in a graveyard, because either way, it's going to your field. In the simplest form, the fact that it can get a body to your field for free in an era where swarming was much less common and more impactful made it an instant staple. Top decking this bad boy could win you so many games. And as time went on and we got more and more generic cards that could only be abused by getting access to the graveyard, this card only got better. And even in simpler terms, in an era where Mechanical Chaser's 1850 attack could determine the momentum of a game by itself, taking one for yourself could be everything. One prominent early era play that I like to look back at is when Dark Magician of Chaos was released, because using a Monster Reborn to revive a copy of D-Mach, using its effect to grab back that Monster Reborn you just used, and then summoning a second monster was an incredibly strong play. And it feels even better if you're reviving an opponent's D-Mach to do so. So much so to the point that in formats where both Dark Magician of Chaos and Monster Reborn are legal, it's a risky play to leave your D-Mach in your grave, since if the opponent has their Reborn, you're going to be massively punished. Similarly, by the time Destiny Hero Disc Commander hits the scene, it's pretty much the same, but drawing cards instead of a 28 beater. I'm a little all over the place here in terms of eras, but believe me when I say that there's a steady stream of monsters that either have big numbers to hit with or solid to great effects if you can summon them back from the graveyard, that are released over the years, even back in Yu-Gi-Oh's earliest days. And a number of decks abused them for years. Reborning a Jinzo to shut off the opponent's traps is timeless and cool because Jinzo was in the anime. Taking a look at this graph from Yu-Gi-Oh! Topdecks.com, you can see a loose outline of the card's popularity in the early years. There's dips as it banned, but when it's limited, it's used. And as things like Synchro monsters and Xyz monsters are introduced to the game, it becomes even more impactful. Synchro and Xyz monsters are cards that need at least 2 materials to make, and Monster Reborn coupled with your normal summon means that you've got a large option of plays to make in the game. Reviving an opponent's tuner and summoning your non-tuner can get you a powerful Synchro, and depending on levels, you could even get the chance to make a Goyo Guardian to out the opponent's Stardust Dragon, or take a Stardust Dragon to protect your own plays. I remember back in the day using my Dark Hole to bait out my opponent's Stardust, then reviving it to my field with Monster Reborn, removing the problem and creating a new one for my opponent, all in one turn. This was especially strong back then because my friend group did not understand the game's rulings at all, and it was decided that if I took your Stardust, it would keep summoning back to my field at the end phase, not the opponent's. That is hard cheating, and I didn't understand the game in 2011, and that's not important, but I do laugh at it, so whoops. Meanwhile, in the Xyz era, so long as you had the right levels available to you, you could make some wonderful plays. Reviving a level 4 and summoning your own can get you access to an instant Utopia against, say, a Dino Rabbit player's Dolka, removing that card from the field in battle and then swinging the tide in your favor. Or maybe you could revive an opponent's Inzektor Hornet, use it to make a Leviathan Dragon, and then keep it attached as a material to prevent the opponent from being able to use it. Is that the most common or even sensible play? No, not really, but I'm like however many minutes into this video, and I need to validate speaking this long somehow, because it's at this point where archetypes and decks playing archetypes become significantly more common threats, or at least broadly speaking. Gladiator Beasts in 2008 are probably like the first archetype to see real success, and while they did exist in the 5Ds era, it's the Xyz era that I personally remember seeing archetypes becoming the kings of the metagame. And with archetypes come mirror matches, which is another place where Monster Reborn can shine. Summon an opponent's Inzektor Dragonfly or Wind-Up Magician, and now you can use their effects to plus for yourself if you're playing the mirror. This is no small part as to why the card saw so much play in 2011 up until its banning in 2013. During this time, it was seen as a borderline necessary card in decks, with a large number of players putting it in the main deck without any need for an explanation. Speaking personally, I can remember viewing it as part of the Holy Trio, as my group called it, in a time where it was me and 5 friends meeting weekly to duel without access to a locals, or as previously established, a sense of rulings of the game, hence hard cheating with Stardust Dragon. During this time, we always put Monster Reborn in every deck alongside Heavy Storm and Dark Hole. I don't think that this was unique to us, but it's a fond memory, and I mention it to bring up that the card felt like a power card. It wasn't something to be used sparingly, it was a way to get back boss monsters and blow out a duel, because you got a free monster, and you can win the game with that. I can't say with exact certainty how universal that sentiment was viewed, but the spike of usage on the charts hints that at the very least I wasn't alone in that thought process. So when it was banned, it was a pretty big hit to just about every single deck. The only exception I can think of is this absolutely insane list that illegally played 4 copies of it while the card was banned in 2016. But if you're confused about that, it was at a regional in Birmingham, and we don't have to delve any further into that cesspit to understand that, much like that city, this list is an abomination. But the card is back now as of 2018, and it's nowhere near where it was in regard to both usage and even reputation. It still does see sporadic play in countless decks, but where once it might have been considered a power card that you should be playing regardless, now it's an optional extender in like 99% of builds that are playing it. And depending on your deck, you'll see people telling you to cut it out entirely for more consistency cards, or starters or extenders that don't need any sort of grave setup beforehand. There's a number of reasons for this, not the least of which is the power level of the game. 2018 is often considered a large step up in how the game is played, with more negates and insane end boards and time theft left in general. Monster Reborn came back right as Spiral's Tier 0 format came to an end, and right before Extra Link Goki and Gumblar hand loops made the game, let's say, nothing short of fun. And when you can't access your extra deck, or Reborn is one of the only 2 cards left in your hand, it's not enough to actually out any modern board, quote unquote, and that's assuming that it can resolve. And even that's without addressing the fact that it's an unsearchable one-of. And no, let's be real here, cards like Millennium Revelation don't count in 99% of duels, so it's an unsearchable one-of. So you just have to hope that you see it and can use it effectively. And now I get to talk a little bit about the downside to the game devolving into archetypes, because while I mentioned earlier there are plenty of chances for it to be strong in a mirror match, there's the opposite and more often true side effect that the opponent's cards are almost useless when it's not a mirror match. Because when you're playing Wind Up and the opponent is on Inzektor, it doesn't really matter whatever it is all that text on Dragonfly says when it's on your field. In your deck, that's just a vanilla, and that applies in 2011 as much as it does now a decade later. Plus, it's not even uncommon for archetypes to have in-theme reborns of their own, meaning they have ways to search out a reborn without having to just hope they top deck this one. Hell, Lib the World Key Blade Master is a semi-generic Link 2 that can allow you to search out World Legacy Succession, which is, in practical terms, a generic monster reborn for any deck so long as they can play a Link monster, which, fun fact, is every deck ever since Links are generic as fuck. The card became an unconventional extender of sorts for most people, and that was in 2018. As I make this video now, in 2023, in a world where just about every deck has a 2-card combo that can make you a board that's absurdly good relative to the power level of the cards printed from 2002, yeah, it just makes more sense to play cards that can be searched or summoned on demand, rather than some random spell card that could otherwise be something to natively support your deck's end goal. Or, you know, something like Skill Drain, because that card's good, but if you're playing Skill Drain, I do hate you. It's not so much that the card became bad in the modern day, per se. The effect is still strong, it's just that decks and the game in general have become stronger. We're at a point where change of heart is at 1 and no one really cares, and Lord knows monsters on the opponent's board are much more important than the ones in either player's graveyard for the most part. Which brings up the point of, should this card still be limited to 1 at all? There are so many in-archetype reborn spells and semi-generic ones that exist in the game, does this really still need the limit? Probably not, although I do wonder how many people would play 3 of this if it ever became unlimited just for the disrespect. I'm reviving your entire graveyard, fuck you, is a hell of a way to open a duel. Konami seems intent to keep it limited. In the TCG, in the OCG, and even in Master Dualism making this, which I imagine is due more so to the card's legacy than its impact on the modern game. And while I will concede that it's probably not needed from a gameplay standpoint, I do admit I'm fine with it from an overall one. Monster Reborn and that little 1 symbol are essentially the same. It's part of the image in my mind, it just looks right, at least to me. Overall, Monster Reborn is what the exact opposite of youths would say is an oldie and a goldie. It's an iconic card from the game's earliest days, and was a powerhouse for years. And while the modern day may have moved past it, it's still a strong and versatile effect. Just as stated before, it's not bad. The game's just crazy fun, and, you know, power creep, but I'm not discussing that exactly in this video. The card's solid, what more do you need to hear? And so, that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, Monster Reborn. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review, or what type of video you'd like to see. Don't forget to like, and as always, subscribe to YGO Strats, to impress your smoking Italian wife, and so that you too can be a true duelist.